Ready graphics? Ready theme?
Good evening. For your information tonight.
Hi, I'm Jesse Mullins.
And I'm Lauren Milberger.
And this is FYI,
The Murphy Brown Podcast.
I think The Temptations got Will wasted.
It's the panacea of parties.
The actors, the couple, their hijinks.
Kitty's gonna scratch.
The patriarchy hurts everyone, y'all.
And on today's episode,
We'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 10, Trouble in Sherwood Forest.
hi everyone, it's Lauren.
And this is Jesse.
And welcome to the punniest pun that has ever pun in the pundom of life.
I have to assume that the writer's room just gave like little shivers of joy when they got to finally write this title. Also, question.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Have we had a title before that was a literal line in the episode?
Oh, hey, that is a good question.
I got so excited when she said that. I did a little Dan Quayle ding for myself. Just
I don't
like,
know.
It's the title.
I'd have to look back. I feel like I want to say no, but
I mean, it's too good.
someone is gonna like tweet or I don't know if it's a tweet anymore.
Yeah. Also, I do want to preface, have we had it yet?
Oh,
I'm not
yet.
talking about future episodes.
I'm gonna say no
Because,
I feel like
yeah,
it's
I'm
a
going to say no. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that it will happen again, but this does seem new for our journey thus far on the podcast.
Yes. This episode is written by Cy Duquesne and Denise Moss. Yay. We love them.
Our friends.
Yes. Please go back and listen to our amazing interview with Denise. And speaking of interviews, also directed by Barnett Kellman.
Barnett Kellman.
I'm trying to find different ways to say his name. Like run out of ideas.
No, we just love Barnett. It's wonderful to say his name.
And it aired December 10th in 1990.
Oh, we're almost out of the first year of the 90s.
We are. And we have some info from Corby, which I think we've mentioned before, that they hadn't thought in advance that the marriage wouldn't work out. And that wasn't really the goal of this particular episode or their arc in general until they got there. Now, I do wonder if it was subconscious because Corby did tell us that at some point, and I don't know when, that she walked past Diane's office and it dawned on her, oh, this isn't going to work out. And sort of together they both went, oh, yeah, it's not. So, you know, sometimes you write subconsciously and you don't realize it, right? I think also sometimes, you know, you just put two characters in a room, so to speak, and because of who they are and their background and their situations, stuff just happens. Problem with Will and Corky is they don't know each other.
Nope. And also, because they are, and she talks about this later, but they are two square pegs trying to fit into the round hole of those expectations of fall in love, get married, have kids, when actually they, like she says, they were planning to break the rules. Neither of them actually want to fit into those gender expectations, that kind of conventional marital expectation. And because of that, they're trying to do the traditional thing while being untraditional.
Yeah. It's not.
And yeah, they like as much as they want it, it's not going to work that way because they're trying to do conventional things while being unconventional and thinking they can make it work, but they're not having those conversations of how does it work.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because what then the show is doing, whether they realize it or not, I like to think that they are, is that they're sort of showing that in the 90s, we are at a time where the old school ways aren't fitting into modern times. And so exactly like you said, they're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. And that's more interesting as an overall idea than, oh, it's just a fun little party and they're having marital issues. Because what I love is that at the end, which we'll get to, that Eldon says, well, I'm going to paraphrase. I don't have the exact quote in front of me. You're not talking to each other because you get that from the beginning. And it's because they're too young and too inexperienced and don't know each other enough to understand that they need to communicate with each other. Like
they just think it's supposed to work.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what they were told.
Well, and when you're young, love is enough. If you love each other, it's like, no, that's actually not how life works.
And just a few episodes before, we have Avery tell Murphy, I never read you fairy tales. Corky was read fairy tales.
Yep. And I think, something that I appreciate about this, especially for when it came out, is the fact that the writers were not lazy and just fell into, they're having problems because they don't like each other. Like, they actually do like each other.
Yeah.
Like, what I love is that you see that, their issues are coming from a place of pain, of both of them feeling, left out by the other, feeling not supported or understood by the, like, it's actually very real conflict. And it's not just a lazy, well, they got married young and they hate each other. Well, no, actually they don't. And that's where the pain comes from. And I think it's a very complex situation. And again, it makes me just so proud of Corky. I'm proud of her for putting herself in the position to not have an easy relationship because she wants more than the fairy tale she was fed.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And I think, I kind of want to touch a little bit on a statement I made, which is like she could have chosen the easy relationship, but she didn't choose the easy relationship. Relationships, I really push back against the trope that marriage is hard, because I think the way people kind of flippantly say that, it feeds into this kind of, ball and chain mentality, or that I don't think relationships should be difficult. But I also think that there are ways that you can settle for a convention that you were told is just what you're supposed to do. And that could be quote unquote simpler, but not right for you. And I think for Corky could have chosen to just be a beauty pageant queen and get that status, meet a handsome man who makes lots of money, and have a simple, conventional life that she was told she should have.
Yeah.
But instead she wanted something different. And I hesitate to say she wanted more, because I think that actually casts a negative light on those who genuinely are fulfilled by a conventional heteronormative relationship. That's fine if that's what you want. Yeah. But she wanted something different. And because of when she is, that is considered more and difficult and, breaking all the rules.
Yeah.
And I love that she, as this young woman, chose to stick to her guns.
Yeah. She wants choice.
Yeah.
She wants to be able to choose what she wants to do and not be put in a box.
Exactly.
And,
I'm so proud of her.
Now, coming into this as someone who isn't married, what I appreciate about this is what I think I was already alluding to or said, actually, was communication, which was not something that I remembered from the episode. We should just get into it, shouldn't we?
Let's get into it.
This is a great discussion,
There's so much to say.
So here is the TV guide summary for this episode. Murphy may have to eat her words when she supports Corky's notion that a dinner party would provide sustenance for her affection-starved marriage.
Jeez. What copy? What copy?
I couldn't wait to read that one to you, Jesse.
Honestly, snaps for that person. Well written.
All right. So we start with our prolonged montage, which we haven't had in a while. It's back. It's just clips of Corky and Will from the wedding episode. It's adorable. It catches us up. And the song is Tell Him. And I believe, Jesse, you have some info on that.
So this song is Tell Him, specifically recorded by the Exciters, which, oh man, what a great
name.
It's such a good name. The second I hear this song, I just start bopping. It's such a good song. Yeah, if you probably know it. If you don't know it by the name, just go click on it on your music streaming app of choice. You will know it immediately. Yes. It's so good.
Dance party. Take a pause. Have a dance party. Come back. We stopped encouraging people to do the dance party. We assumed you're still doing it, but this is definitely a dance party bop.
This is a given dance party. Yeah. So Tell Him was originally Tell Her. Is a 1962 song. It was written and composed by Burt Burns under the original pen name of Burt Russell, but it was made popular by this recording titled Tell Him by the Exciters. Oh. So originally, it was recorded in 1962 as Tell Her by Gil Hamilton, aka Johnny Thunder.
Oh, that's a name.
Right? Johnny Thunder.
Oh.
With Burns producing. However, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller produced this version by the Exciters, released as Tell Him in October of 1962. Tell Him reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, dated 26th of January, 1963. Now, there are a couple interesting little tidbits about this song. So, Dusty Springfield, you may have heard, was en route to Nashville in 1962 to make a country music album with the Springfields. She was on a stopover in New York City when she heard the Exciters version of Tell Him playing while taking a late-night walk by the Colony Record Store in Broadway. The experience persuaded Springfield to embark on a solo career with a pop soul direction. She would recall, the Exciters sort of got you by the throat. Out of the blue comes blasting at you something about love, and that's it. That's what I want to do. So that song is what caused Dusty Springfield to go on a solo career with pop soul. Secondly, this is a quote from Jason Ackeny at AllMusic. Jason says that the Exciters' version of Tell Him, quote, boasted an intensity that signified a sea change in the presentation and perception of femininity in popular music, paving the way for such tough, sexy acts as the Shangri-Las and the Ronettes.
Hey.
So if you know the song, you might know it from a few different movie soundtracks. In 1983, it was featured on The Big Chill. In 1988, it was featured in Something About Love. In 2009, it was in the animated film Monsters vs. Aliens. In 2016, it was featured in 10 Cloverfield Lane, which is quite the reference. But for me, it was and will always be on the soundtrack of the 1997 classic, My Best Friend's Wedding.
The first thing I thought of.
I was like, oh, let's go watch it. So that's Tell Him. You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. We're back. Murphy, by the way, again, this season, the costume is fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so I was trying to figure out, it's like, she's got like sort of a tartan. Is that what we would call the jacket?
I mean, it's a plaid.
It's a plaid.
Tartan is a very specific, like, Scottish pattern.
Yeah, I wrote Scottish pattern in quotes.
Yeah. I have to say, I basically wore this exact outfit, like, last week to work. I have a blue and green plaid double-breasted blazer. I had a, like, cream turtleneck, just not the skirt.
She has a brooch, you know.
I didn't rock the brooch.
I so remember how like pins and brooches were so like big in the 90s. Like I had so many big pins that I bought at like jewelry stores. I like put on jackets.
Yes. We gotta bring that back. I mean, they're back, so let's do it.
I feel like it's kind of coming back. I think people are being a lot more eclectic with their fashion.
I think we're returning to maximalism, which I'm really excited about.
And also I think recycling. I think a lot of people are like, I'm going to go thrifting and I'm just going to like create something that I'm going to wear, which I love. Murphy is talking to Fran because she needs more information for her interview, and she thinks that her interview with Newt Gingrich is going to kill her. And I just want to really briefly remind people who aren't familiar, Newt Gingrich was a major Republican at the time and the Speaker of the House, and represents kind of the antithesis of what Murphy believes in.
Yeah, I think the antithesis of many of us.
So it's going to kill her on many levels.
Yeah.
Corky and Will come off the elevator. I love when Faith has the little puffball hair. It's very teased, but it's very cute. It's like, I think of Corky, I think of this, or I think of like when she puts her hair sort of on the top of her head in this sort of severe bun.
Yeah, it's very youthful, the little puff hair.
It is. Corky and Will are extremely awkward. Like, right from the get-go. Yeah. She didn't think he needed to walk her to work, but he feels, as a husband, it's one of life's pleasures. Now, I love that it sort of starts this way, because what we're seeing is that Will has an idea of what it should be to be a husband, but you can't always fit life into a small little box. And they're both kind of playing house in a way.
As we will really get into at the end of this episode.
Yes, we will.
The patriarchy hurts everyone, y'all.
Yes.
Everyone.
Yes. I mean, it's crazy, right? Because it hasn't even been a year. Like, the honeymoon phase is not even officially over. And already, like, they're realizing that they're married to strangers. They don't know each other.
And that maybe the romantic fancies they have aren't that romantic in practice.
And I was so like yelling at the two of them and just being like, this is why living together and sex before marriage saves on divorce. And this is my TED Talk that I will live on for the rest of my life.
Also, communication.
Well, we already talked about that. I mean, yes. I mean, communication is number one. But also,
like, I don't know, let's discuss how gender roles actually work in your relationship.
Murphy is excited to see the newlyweds. She says that the last time that she saw Will, he was chugging champagne and trying to take off his wife's garter with his teeth.
Fair.
So question, did they have a party by themselves, or did they then go, hey, psych, everyone, we got married and brought the party back?
I think that those who were left at the wedding stayed and had the rest of the reception, because that's a reception activity. Is the garter.
Yes.
I think the little handful of them that were left in that space just did the entire thing, just them. That's what I think happened. I think the Temptations got Will wasted.
That's honestly what I assumed. So
That's my
So
headcanon.
this is funny to me because I'm picturing it just being Murphy and Frank at the Temptations. Yes. So we find out, this is a very big piece of information for later on in the series, that Will has finally found the focus and the topic for his novel, which is an historical novel about a little Dutch boy in the American Revolution, which everyone, Murphy and Corky, we all know, bad idea.
Yeah.
But, Will also doesn't seem as excited as well. I mean, he's not excited, right? It's very obvious that Corky and Murphy are like, oh. But he's just kind of like, yeah, no, I found an idea. And
my personal, if I was going to armchair diagnose Will.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I think Will operates, and we see this, with his, gender expectations as well, but I think Will only knows how to operate under what you're supposed to do, and he doesn't know how to operate under what he wants to do. So he wants to write, but he automatically goes into well, I have to do blank. Well, I have to have this done. Well, I have to, I think he's trying to find the topic that would be best and not the topic he wants.
Yeah,
I don't think he knows how to operate from a place of internal motivation. It's all external. It's deadlines. It's this. It's how you have to do it.
They picked someone for Corky who she technically had grown up with, right? Whether she had been friends with him or not, that's a whole other story. But who come from the same environment of expectations in a way of the life that they were expected to live.
Yeah.
But I think that you're right. I think that then he looked around and was like, well, I only know how to be one thing. So now I'm trying to fit in what supposedly is my gender norm into this new reality. But he's new to it. Corky's been doing it for a couple of years. Not even, mentioning being, Miss America and touring the world and meeting other people. It's just been a different experience than he has had. And I think he's flummoxed.
They wanted this thing and they never stopped to think about, well, once I try, how do I actually do it?
Yeah. It was, I'm going to marry the popular girl from high school, and Corky was going to marry her Prince Charming.
And check that box off. Now we can worry about the other boxes that I need to achieve. And it's like, nope, you actually got to do something with that one. You actually just can't be done.
It's like how they talk about that Into the Woods, which if people aren't familiar, it's fairy tales, Stephen Sondheim. The end of Act 1 is, and they lived happily ever after, so to speak. Not literally saying that, but the end of the stories that we know. And then the second act is reality, so to speak. And they say that that a lot of people will leave after the first act because they think it's over.
Well, also, that the junior version for schools is just Act 1.
Oh, of course it is. Oh, of course it is.
Yeah.
Oh, of course it is. Hilarious. So here's where we really get a real slice into their relationship, because Corky and Will walk to the elevator, and it's obvious that Will is upset that Corky always comes home late but doesn't know how to express it. Instead, it comes out as real horribleness to Corky because she's being rather sweet and trying to be understanding, and he is just holding in all of his thoughts and being angry that she's not coming home in time for them to spend time together.
I also want to just pull a little bit of emotional intelligence into the conversation.
Please.
And say, there's a concept of your secondary emotion, which is hiding your primary emotion. Anger is almost always a secondary emotion. So if he's angry, it's because he's hurt. It's because he's lost. It's because he thinks that she's left him alone to deal. Anger is always a secondary. So it's really interesting. But I think there's, again, these gender norms that have been modeled to them is so he gets to be angry, and she automatically snaps into sweet, fix it.
Yeah.
Because that's what you do.
And he literally says, I'll see you when I see you, which is so oh, Will.
Ugh. If this scene was happening now in a show,
it
would be so much more dramatic.
In
this
a
would be this would be a hyper-realistic, dramatic scene in a show now. And I actually love that it's that it's true sitcom. There's a lot happening, but we're not overplaying the drama of it, which I think is really, really smart. But I think if this was you could not write this scene now for a modern comedy, because I think they'd go too serious too quickly. And I think that's what actually sells about this, is we're not playing the end yet.
No, we're not. So Jim, Miles, and Frank come off the elevator and see the newlyweds kissing goodbye and are just a bunch of frat boys. Oh, it's okay that you're late because, of course, they're newlyweds. All these sexual innuendos. But my favorite of all three of them Although, of course, Jim, I shouldn't say this. Jim is very like, no, hey now, no.
Just,
like,
hey now.
This is inappropriate. But the little dance that Miles does, again, there's so... I can't even explain it. Like, he's kind of just like, hey. Like, that's how I would describe it. He doesn't say hey.
If someone did that to me, I'd be like, ah.
Yeah, like, cool bro. He's trying to be cool bro.
Yeah. What's important is it's someone who is the least cool bro trying to be cool bro.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. Corky goes to her office to get some things before they start the meeting, and Murphy just knows right away. She tells the gang, you could cut the tension with a knife. And what I love is that this is very sort of reminiscent to previous scenes that we've had, particularly in the Chapel of Love episode. That even though, as we learn in this episode and as we know throughout the series, Murphy is not good at relationships. Murphy doesn't like to give advice. Murphy is not the person you go to when you have a man problem, quote unquote, because she's not good at it, right? But the fact that the show is not losing the fact that as a woman, she can see something in Corky. And also she cares about Corky as her friend, but also as a woman in need. And I think that that's something that gets lost throughout the series as the show gets broader, but not even just that, as we've talked about in the past, is that sometimes people forget that you can have complexity to yourself. And just because you have so-called, and again, I want to be careful about this because it's, again, so-called male characteristics, right? That you don't have other aspects of yourself. No one is a monolith. And I like the fact that Murphy isn't in a box necessarily. She is a little more layered and keys into something that these men just don't see. Does that make sense?
It does. For me, I actually saw less of that and more that I saw the child of a broken marriage.
Oh, that's a good point. I like that too.
Because Corky is someone who saw what she considered a perfect marriage relationship. And so that's what she has modeled. Whereas Murphy, as a female identifying human in this day and age, definitely was still raised with the messaging of how you're supposed to behave and what's okay. But I think specifically she has seen what happens when a couple is not working.
I love that. And so this is a trauma response in Murphy. It's recognition.
Yeah, and I think just being like, y'all, this is not, this is not what's happening.
And I think a lot of this is probably clouded because how I saw Murphy go. I just think that that sometimes, particularly when you're writing something that isn't your experience, particularly back then versus now, this idea of like what is gender it doesn't matter. It's like you are who you are and you have many different facets of yourself. And I guess for me, that's refreshing because she feels like a fully fledged character and not a stereotype.
Oh yeah, I don't disagree with any of that.
Okay.
For me, it was just this moment was less for the spectrum of gendered characteristics and more that it was hey, are you guys paying attention? Because that is not a happy marriage.
And I do like yours better. So a woman is crying, absolutely sobbing, and the men just kind of go on with the meeting, and Murphy is appalled.
It's like, God. But the growth from season 1, where we have, instead of Murphy othering herself from the other woman that she doesn't want to be connected with, she's like, okay, come on, girl. So proud.
I also love what Faith is doing. And at one point, her voice gets so high pitched that like dogs could probably hear it. Like it was so, you talk about comedic crying, you think of Diane Keaton, right? And I feel like this is definitely like sort of up there, but also knowing like where to like hit the pitches with the certain lines and when to just sob through it. I think it's great.
Okay. Quick first up best thought. What is your favorite Diane Keaton cry?
I mean,
I have mine.
It's Something's Got to Give, of course. The crying montage.
No.
It's First Wives Club. First Wives Club.
Screaming, I'm sorry in the elevator. Best Diane Keaton cry ever. Please continue.
You're right. I just haven't seen it in a while.
I love that I'm like, give me yours. No, you're wrong. No,
no it's brilliant. That was a great question. I was very excited.
Oh, Diane, I love you so much.
Yes. And we love Diane's.
We love the Dianes.
If Diane Keaton would like to come on our show, that would be awesome. So Murphy's like, how come men go stupid when this happens? So then one of my favorite pieces of visual comedy that the show has done is, well, first of all, Murphy wants to take Corky to her office, and this is the most honest, I think, that Corky has been, in the sense of like, yeah, Corky is honest, but she feels she's helping. This is Corky, like, actually saying something that she usually probably doesn't think that she should say because of what she says later, which is Murphy's office. Yeah, like, it's as if she's like being pulled into like a dungeon to have to get advice from Murphy.
Alone with no backup.
One of my favorite Faith moments. And then she pulls Corky by the arm while Faith holds onto the chair, which must have been a feat they had to practice without hurting her.
Yes.
And then drags her in the chair across the entire bullpen into the office, to the door, I should say, lifts her up, brings her in the office, and closes the door. It's fantastic.
My favorite Faith moment is the little cheep she makes as she gets lifted out of the chair.
The squeal is great.
I literally wrote, it has to be like a cheep. It's not even a full squeal. It's just like a little tiny, like, bird was like lifted out and thrown into this office.
In the office, Murphy is so bad that she just pats her head like a little dog and goes, there.
We got a dartboard, right?
Yes, we do have a dartboard. The dartboard took me a moment to be able to figure it out. The dartboard says deposits insured up to $100,000.
We're going to have to noodle about what we think that is.
Every time it's something like that, I think that it's an SNL thing, and it probably isn't. But that's always where I go to.
Every time I'm like, it's got to be savings and loans, right?
Yeah. There's like so much savings and loans references on the show that's where my brain goes. But it could have just been something that like bugged someone that week.
Which also here for.
Yes. And of course, this dartboard is the dartboard that we couldn't read. Now it makes so much sense in Bob and Murphy, Ted and Avery. So that mystery is solved.
Yay! We love hindsight.
And this is what I was alluding to before, is that Corky says, I shouldn't be bothering you. You're busy with work. You have things to do. You really stink when it comes to giving advice. So again, she's trying to be like, oh, no, it's not that I don't like you, but you're really bad at it. But you're also probably really busy. Like, she's trying to be polite about it. But it's like, no, you're really bad.
Yep.
And then comes one of my favorite Murphy lines ever, which is, Corky, it's not that I give bad advice. It's that I have no real interest in other people's problems.
Oh, what a mood.
Oh, a total mood. And then what kind of ends up happening is that Murphy decides that they should look at it like journalists, analytical and unemotional. But what ends up happening is just a lot of word salad or like word association where she just sort of is saying things that lead to other words. And then the
girl is struggling.
She is struggling. But then the whole scene becomes that word association makes Corky answer all of her own questions and then thank Murphy for it.
It's genius. Honestly, it's what the majority of therapy is, which is the other person posing things so that you work your way through it rather than them giving you answers, which is kind of the empowerment of thought that Corky needs. Like, Corky needs to come to her solutions. And so weirdly, because Murphy's so bad at it, she actually does a really good job therapizing her.
It is, but then throughout the episode, Murphy then takes complete credit as if this was her idea.
Absolutely, she does.
For Corky and Will to have a dinner party to bring back the spark in their relationship because they need to spend time together.
As the kids would say, I'm sure it's not that deep, but I do think that there's something really sweet in hindsight about the context of Murphy being the child of a broken marriage, which also I know that phrase can be kind of hurtful for some to hear. So I just mean a child of divorce, in that the way she seems to be trying to save this marriage. Like, she's so invested in saving this relationship for these two people that I just see the child of divorce.
Oh,
sweet Murphy. I'm sure it actually wasn't that deep when they wrote it. It was just funny that Murphy's like, we can do it. But to me, I'm like, oh, baby Murphy.
And it's pretty much left where Murphy says it's a gift. Don't tell anyone or everyone will be coming looking for advice. So Corky runs into the bullpen, announces that everyone is going to bring their significant other to dinner on Monday and that Frank will have to miss football.
A doorbell ringing to an apartment which is a vision in pink floral and late 80s, early 90s, homey feminine aesthetics.
Oh, is it?
But as the doorbell rings, Will comes out and he is in a t-shirt and casual pants. He is muttering to himself over a piece of paper and a pencil that he seems to be intermittently chewing as he thinks and mutters. And he opens the door, and it's Jim and Doris.
Oh,
My king and queen. And Doris looks incredible in this kind of like eggplant to burgundy dress.
yeah, they both look incredible. And then Jim has like a purple
Jim
tie
always looks incredible.
with an ascot. Like, I was like, I love this couple. I wish there was a full series on just the two of them.
I truly like the way they fill my heart, these two. I mean, the actors, the couple, their hijinks. I love them. So everything that Janet Carroll releases from her pie hole is gold. I just love her.
And it was great to see them alone, right? Like, this is the only time we really sort of see them for a moment alone with themselves.
The
and how
way
they act.
she kind of drawls at him,
Yes.
incredible. So Jim has wine. Doris has a significant bouquet of flowers that are not wrapped. They're just like there's no wrapping around the stems. They're just stems. I wrote a credit to their generation. They say greetings and compliment the smell of the roast coming down the hall.
Can I just say, I love the fact that Doris says that she could smell the roast down the hall and then forces the like flowers
Yeah,
like
she like
on
punctuates
Will.
with
She
gesturing
punctuates
the flowers,
it.
which Will does not take. I feel like Jim's worst scenario is being early to a party and having to sit in the home awkwardly because he asks, are they too early? We can sit in the car.
15 minutes early is on time.
Exactly as I was raised. So I love it because to me, being fashionably late is arriving on time, and I'm still the early one. So Will apologizes. He says he lost track of time, and Corky is late again. He says he's in the middle of a really tricky paragraph, so he just needs to go work on that. They should open the wine and get comfortable. And he just dashes back off stage to where his typewriter is, which we will hear for the majority of this scene.
Mm-hmm.
I love a typewriter audio over a scene like this. One, because it's really jarring and loud, so you can tell he's like really on it. Mm-hmm. But it also somewhat mimics a metronome and a clock. So it kind of puts a clock on the scene. There's just this tension that comes from it that I think is really beautiful aurally.
Yeah, yeah.
So Jim and Doris just kind of stand awkwardly at the front. They eventually take their coats off and just sling them over a chair that's near the front. Doris decides to put the bouquet of flowers in a conveniently empty vase nearby that also has a little like acrylic podium near some ceramic cats that she can then place it. As she's kind of fluffing the flowers, Jim just starts opening the glass cabinet off in the corner. And she does this drawl of just looking for something.
That's my favorite part because it's like they're alone. This is their relationship, and I love it.
And the way that she's just like not looking at him, but so aware of what he's doing. The drawl of the kind of like playful challenge. Jim says no, and she posits that perhaps he's looking for the silver fruit bowl we gave Corky for a wedding present. And he says he was not. That would be gauche. And then he proceeds to peek under a plant in the corner.
Yes.
It's the tiny little like plant branch lift. Ding, the doorbell rings. They open the door to see Frank, who arrives with a portable antenna TV to watch his game with the most comically large antenna just pointing the way into the room.
Also, I have to say, I mean, again, Frank has money and I didn't grow up with money, so maybe that's why. But it is small.
He's money and single.
Yes. But for a television, like it looks like a transistor radio, but like for a TV in 1990, I was like, wow, like we had one of those portable Walkman ones, like the big yellow one that you would take to the beach, but it was huge and thick and it was like a brick.
Yeah. To me, this is not Frank's recreational portable TV. To me, this is Frank. He uses it in the field as a journalist. It needs to be small and portable.
Yeah, I like that.
To me, this is not him spending on tech for recreation. It's he took something for work to be able, he's treating this like he's like monitoring like a war front.
I should also let the audience know that it's most likely a black and white screen also.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he walks in, the comically large antenna is just like pointing the way as he doesn't even make eye contact. He just walks in, greets them casually, going to the couch to turn on the actual TV in the den that they are in, and while yelling, why don't you just give it to him to the game? We do know that Monday Night Football is a big deal for many people.
Yeah.
So,
and on up against Murphy.
Oh, yeah. So he puts the portable TV away because now the TV is on because, of course, he's just made himself at home. Doris offers the open wine, a charming little Chardonnay. And Frank wants to know if there are any chips around because he missed lunch. Doris notices there don't appear to be any hors d'oeuvres and then decides to just go add water to the flowers. Jim decides to follow her to the kitchen to see if the bowl is in the kitchen. We are left with Frank just sitting watching the game on the TV in the empty den. The doorbell dings. Miles and Audrey have arrived.
Audrey!
Audrey! Let me tell you, she does not disappoint. Never does. As they enter, Frank is the only one to greet them. He does not look up, but he does say, Will's in the den writing, Corky's not home yet, be along soon, wise open, pleasant Chardonnay.
I love that line delivery. It's perfect.
It's so good. And what I wrote, honestly, it shows he's very good at multitasking.
Yes.
The amount of information that he gleaned while not seeming to pay attention to anyone, I'm like, this is why he's good at investigative journalism.
Also, the fact that it's pleasant Chardonnay makes that line hilarious.
Exactly. So this is what I wrote. Audrey's outfit, much like, so I wrote earlier that Corky and Murphy's outfits would be worn right today.
Yeah.
In that first scene, Audrey's outfit would absolutely be worn today.
Oh, it's so into
this little,
what
like,
is
baby
returning
doll
from the
dress.
90s. Yeah.
Yes. It's like baby doll dress. It's got a little bit of a shimmer in the threading, but it's this kind of like purple and blue. It's not paisley, but it's got this kind of like artistic, impressionistic pattern on it with little buttons. It's kind of gauzy. And she's got opaque tights. Like, I would absolutely see this right now.
So this is the outfit of a young woman in the 90s, and not Friends, right? But it's, I mean, Friends is later, it's 95, right? So that's a very different time of the 90s. And it was so nice to see this because I recognized it from my youth, from being in middle school at the time and seeing, you know, my friends, maybe me try to dress like this, probably not as successful as Audrey. And it was so great to see because it was like, oh, they got that Audrey is younger. Audrey is a different also money bracket, so to speak. And that you don't really see. And it fits her, right? Sort of a little bohemian. It makes complete sense. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because, you know, Audrey and Corky are similar as far as age and interest in fashion, except Corky's trying to be a Murphy Brown. So she's trying to dress in that, whereas Audrey is dressing as a young, trendy, non-businesswoman.
Yeah.
So she looks around the home and says, it's a lovely home. It's so much more homey now that it's filled with a couple's love. Not like her place or Miles's place. Two separate places.
I love that this is the plot that they've given her. Because then she's so not just there. She has a goal and a purpose through the scene, which then brings tension.
She always does.
Yeah, I love it.
She gives herself a goal to achieve every moment of her life. Miles picks up on this. This is clearly something that comes up a lot. He says he doesn't know, like maybe people should get to know each other. And then he walks over to where she's standing and goes, oh, this must be Will's corner with all his stuff shoved into it. He thinks maybe people should be together a year, maybe 5 before they talk about things like this. Jim, what do you think? Doris? And Jim looks so uncomfortable and just goes, who's to say? Time is relative. What is time? What time is it now?
Again,
all in pain.
I know we talk about this a lot this season, but there's something about a lot of Jim's lines this season that on paper would not be as funny if not for the line delivery of Charles Kimbrough.
He's a genius. I love a Jim ramble. Like when we get them, they are so good because he just starts to lose it and starts to do kind of word association himself. And just, what time is it now? He just needs to be saved. At that moment, he is saved by a hello because Murphy has arrived. No doorbell ring. She's just walking in. I wrote, Murphy is here to be positive Patty.
Oh, yes, she is. And by the way, speaking of Diane Keaton, this outfit.
Oh, my God.
I would not look good in it, but Murphy looks fantastic. It's like Diane Keaton with Katharine Hepburn sort of like merged into one. High collar, this sort of scarf lacy thing, right? Sort of around the neck.
Neckline, because the high collar's not actually buttoned up all the way, so the scarf goes down the neckline.
Yeah.
Almost like an ascot, but not an ascot. And then this like long pearl necklace outside of the collar.
And the hair pulled back in the French twist with the bow in the back.
The hat when she first comes in. It's a little artsy.
Yes, it's very artsy. It's fabulous.
She says the roast smells great. Also, I have to say, roasts forever. Like, I love a roast. Roasts are incredible. They just sit there and they simmer and they get so good and they can just be there all day. Oh, I love a roast. And she says she is sure that a night of joy and merriment will ensue. I love that she throws the liquid U in. Will ensue instead of ensue. She's just, she's selling the positivity. Frank is starving, so he runs to pilfer the kitchen for cornflakes if he can find them. Tells him to call him when the commercial is over. And now everyone just sits in the room, silent. We have the sound of the commercial. We have the sound of Will's typing. And then a sound of a bag of something being crunched in the kitchen. And Doris just looks over to her right at Murphy and says, I understand you had a lot to do with this party, Murphy.
Doris forever.
It's so damning. I love her so much. So Frank enters from the kitchen. He has found trail mix and he is eating it out of the silver fruit bowl that Jim has been looking for. He offers it to everyone. Jim is horrified that a sterling silver fruit bowl is being used for something as low as trail mix. Frank is undeterred. And Murphy says, no thanks. I have complete faith my plan will work, so I am saving room for a delicious meal made with warmth and love. And at that moment, Corky arrives. She looks, I would say, a little frazzled. Mm-hmm. Would be a simple way to say it. She's holding like grocery bags. She says, oh God, you're all here waiting for me. I'm so sorry. She's horrified by everyone sitting around. She wants to know why Will isn't entertaining them. And what is the cat food doing out here?
And there it is.
So for those who can't see the visual gag, Frank is eating what he thought was trail mix out of the silver fruit bowl. That trail mix happens to be cat food. Mm-hmm. And everyone in the room except Murphy starts retching or finding somewhere to spit.
It's a great pice of business. Every single person. Funny. I have to say, and this is an episode that I have not rewatched a lot, so that could be it. Mm-hmm. I didn't notice that everyone had eaten it. My memory had been that it was Frank and maybe Miles. And so the fact that it was everyone. Like Audrey and Jim and Doris. And then
they're all starving.
And then I'm not sure if Joe is laughing, but he like ducks behind Miles Grant's like body.
Yep.
And then he like hands him he drinks the wine and then hands him the wine as well, so they can sort of get the taste out of them. It's such a great piece of business from everybody in the room.
I really was trying to figure out if he was laughing or if it was that he was trying to find somewhere in the cushions behind him to spit it out, or if he was laughing and use that as a reason to make it look like that.
Yeah, no, it's
Either
great.
Way, it's so funny. I also love that Doris just like opens her pocketbook to see if maybe she could spit it in there and gives up. It's so funny. Will saunters out conveniently at that moment.
Oh, I wanted to ask you a question about, because I don't have a cat.
Okay, yeah.
I have cat sit for friends, but still. Is there a world in which a cat food could be confused for trail mix?
I think it depends on the cat food brand.
Okay, fair.
Most cat food, I mean, looks like, especially then, looked like traditional kibble. Mm-hmm. However, there are the things like, that people have different phrases for this snack, but I grew up calling it puppy chow. That is the mix of like Chex Mix and peanut butter and chocolate and powdered sugar. Okay. That literally looks like
there
kibble.
You go. Okay. There is
like that. I think his blood sugar is so low that he saw that went, okay, yeah, it's trail mix, and just ate it. The fact that everyone else fell for it too, though, I want to know what kind of cat food this is. It's very funny to me. Yeah, I can't answer that. I also only give my cats wet food. So it's been
and listen, it doesn't matter. Kibble. It's a great bit. I just thought it would be interesting as someone who doesn't have a cat to ask you that question.
So Will saunters out and his arms are crossed. I also like the implication that he's been so busy that he can't entertain, but he is listening for Corky to come home.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Like she doesn't ding. There's like she enters, but he hears it. Also, I think, maybe her voice carries. But he walks out, arms crossed, asks where she's been. She says, well, she got hung up at work and then she got to the market and it was packed. He says he thought she would have called. This is getting very awkward. And I like it because they're playing it very straight. Like, I actually feel very tense watching this.
Yeah, no, they are, totally.
And she says, well, sweetheart, she couldn't find one of those phones so conveniently located next to the checkout line.
Just wait a couple of decades.
Uh-huh. And Murphy just swings on in her little head and says, well, they're here now and they're all together, so bring out those hors d'oeuvres. Corky is horrified and asks why didn't he bring out the canapes? And he said, no, she's hors d'oeuvres and first course. He is roast and dessert. And she says, but they switched this morning, remember? And I do have to say, speaking of communication, I do defend him in this moment.
I do too.
Because he says, I've told you, if you talk to me while I'm writing, I won't hear it.
Which means that she didn't get a confirmation back. She assumed that she would just say it and he would do it.
Yep. And I like that because normally I'm like, I'm going to be team lady in this scenario.
Yeah.
But I actually think that is one of the few times where he tried to communicate. This thing takes up my attention. I'm not going to hear it. And she didn't receive or consider that important enough to retain.
And I think
that, you know what?
And I think that Corky is also probably falling into sort of the gender norm as the quote unquote breadwinner, which is I'm at work all day, so you should do what I ask you to do because you're here all day.
I need you to do this because I'm going to be late.
Yeah. Whereas his thing is, I may be here, but my work is just as important as yours. That she probably freaked out in the morning and was like, oh my God, we should switch.
Yep. Oh, that's the thing. She's not making sense. If she was like calmly planning a party, this wouldn't have happened. Like, that's the point, is she's in crisis and this is supposed to be the magic button that's going to fix everything. Which, of course, the second you put that kind of emphasis on something, it's going to fail you. Yeah. Like, it's not going to work.
It's the panacea of parties.
Oh, it truly is. Murphy puts their hands together and says, hey, why don't they both go in the kitchen and solve it together? Wouldn't that be a fun activity together? And they soften and they look at each other, which, again, what I love is these are not people who don't care about each other.
Yeah. I appreciate
and so in that moment, they see each other and they're like, oh, right, I love you. Okay, we can fix it. No one's mad at us yet. Mm-hmm. And we cut to.
We know that time has passed because of two reasons. The stock photography of Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And the fact that the football game is over. Because those things run long.
Someone timestamps it and says it's 10 p.m.
Oh, but that's later. That is correct.
No, but we do get confirmation of literally how long it's been.
That's a very good point. Yeah, later on we do. Frank is so upset with the game's ending and also how he is wasting his time caring about a game. Which
Frank, it cannot win against himself.
Fair. To which he decides that he should do something else with his Monday nights and asks if Gunsmoke is still on. Let me ask you, Jesse, do you know how long Gunsmoke was on the air?
I don't.
It was on from 1955 to 1975.
Dang.
So it was not off the air that long ago.
Yeah.
In 1990, if you think about it. It's kind of
like a younger, almost childhood reference for him.
Yeah. And into his adulthood as well. Yep. But also it's kind of like the Law and Order of its time. I mean, Law and Order has now gone past 20 years. It's not just like it's an old show. Delightful. It's a show that was on for so long, it might as well still be on the air. Everyone is starving, including Murphy, but she still, feels that they should all wait.
Yes.
And that they should act like they're having the time of their lives. To which Audrey goes, oh, okay. My terrible British accent. And what I love is that the audience gets it. They remember that this is Audrey's thing. And they know,
don't tell Audrey this.
That it is coming, that she is going to exaggerate and make stuff up because she thinks that's what she's supposed to do.
Oh, God.
The first course comes out. It looks like Corky and Will have done it together and they're all excited. It's one shrimp and like a couple of vegetables, I think. Like it's very
one person gets a shrimp, one person gets a pea.
Yeah. Like French cuisine, I guess. And Audrey goes into a full monologue about how they didn't even notice that the time had passed. So she regales the group that they've been talking about a recurring dream that Miles has been having in which Herman Goring was chasing him across the Alexander Flats, I think she says India, waving a 7-tier chocolate cake and shouting, "Come to the party."
I am going to, quote, "come to the party" for the rest of my life. I completely forgot about that, but the way her voice just like rises as she yells, "Come to the party!"
Come to the party!
Oh my God. I'm going to say it all the time with no context for anyone.
It's this little moment with her is when you go, oh yeah, this is why she ended up booking like one of the biggest TV shows of all time.
Gosh, she's so funny.
And then Miles wakes up screaming, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. And then this is where Audrey is a genius because then she brings it on back to her issue. Of course, none of this would happen if you had a woman around to comfort you, right, Pookie? And then what's great is that they all sort of pause, like they don't move so that the focus is on Audrey. And I think it's so funny where they're all just kind of like, what? And nobody moves. They just kind of stare at Audrey and Miles about this crazy dream. So everyone is extremely unhappy with their small portions, but then the roast comes out. They all come to the small little table. Murphy, again, uses the time to say, this was all because of me. I did this. It's my credit. And it is untrue. Will pulls out a plug-in knife and offers it to Jim, the expert carver, who disparages it as not a real knife, pretty much, not realizing that it was a gift from Miles for their wedding.
I have to tell you, the 70s and 80s really convinced me that carving of the meat, like the carving of the meat of the meal, was the height of masculinity.
Yes, no, it was. I mean, I really believe that that's what people thought.
Also, when those like electric carvers
Mm-hmm.
came out, it was such a moment. Like, it was such a big deal.
I saw them, I
To be
think, in
able
a
to do
lot
that.
of shows. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He refers to it as a silly contraption.
Mm-hmm.
To which
Well, because
Miles,
he's a traditionalist.
yes, to which Miles, who obviously is ornery from not being able to eat, says, I would have gotten them a $300 cat bowl, but you already took care of that.
So good. I'm so proud of him.
Kitty's going to scratch. Long story short, the roast is not cooked. Like he can't get through it. It short circuits the whole thing. Will forgot. He forgot to defrost it. And so he thought he'd just put it in for longer.
Oh, buddy.
And as Murphy says, even I know that. This is the last straw for Murphy because she is tired. And I don't know if I've ever seen this, but Candace's face is red from screaming.
Yeah. She went there.
Because I always marvel at the fact that her face doesn't get red when she screams.
Yeah.
And I've never seen that before. And so, yeah, she really is going for it. Will and Corky go to talk in the den, to which Murphy continues her rant of, oh, sure, run off and leave us to die. It's 10 o'clock and all we've had so far is a shrimp, a pea, and cat kibble. This isn't a party, it's hell. Which is as an outline. Because then we are in the townhouse.
Murphy makes her way to the door, and there is Corky in the doorway holding a pillow. All of us know what this means. But Murphy is so happy to see Corky because she has been calling her for an hour with no one picking up, trying to apologize for yelling. She says she thinks low blood sugar and PMS all converged, but Corky interrupts her and says Will walked out. But then he came back because he didn't have enough money for the hotel. So then she left, but then she couldn't stomach going to a hotel with no luggage. So now she's here at Murphy's door, which honestly, absolutely the person I would go to.
Yeah.
In that scenario.
I love that the first thing Murphy thinks of is she wants to apologize.
It's so, I love their relationship.
She's
I
not
love where it's going.
Yeah, she's not a person who apologizes a lot for her behavior.
No. And I love like this idea of like, Murphy had really committed to, we're going to fix this. And then the way she's like internalized it, that she's the reason that it didn't go well. I was like, oh, sweetie, no. So Murphy ushers Corky into the den and onto the couch and says that she has a confession to make. She, Murphy Brown, doesn't know anything about relationships. Corky was right. She stinks at this. So don't ask her any hard questions because God knows what could happen. And Corky's sitting on the couch. Faith's acting in this scene is so simple and lovely. Like, it is so grounded and simple. I'm obsessed with it. And she just asks, have you ever felt so empty you couldn't even cry anymore?
Yes, Corky. Yes, I have.
Yes, Corky. I just wrote, poor baby. Yes.
That line really took me by surprise. I was not expecting that line in this scene. I mean, obviously we know the structure of Murphy Brown a lot right now. And the final scene is going to be a little dramatic, a come to home moment, where Murphy realizes what she's done wrong, or we sort of come together on the crux of the episode. But man, that line.
It got me. We so rarely get to see Corky be the one that has this moment.
Yeah.
In an episode. And getting to watch Faith play the sincere, dramatic moment that it is so lovely. And it means so much that Corky's in this place of self-awareness, of being able to articulate this. It just makes you realize how long she's been sitting with it. So Murphy begins to crack about that's a question, I told you. But Corky just softly responds and says she's scared. The way she just says, I'm scared, is so... it cuts anything Murphy has as far as like maintaining the artifice of like, don't ask me questions, I can't do this. So Murphy just sits down quietly and says, okay, let's talk. And this is where Corky starts to explain the real issue, which is that it was going to be so perfect. They were going to break all the rules. She'd have this great career and support him while he wrote his novel. But it's not going exactly the way they planned. She says they are two separate people living two separate lives. They even have two bank accounts because he's too proud to take her money. which nowadays I'm like, girl, keep your bank account. And she turns to her and says, it's our money, Murphy. Why does he have such a hard time with that? Oh, right. You don't know. This line kills me. She says, Mother always told her she could have everything she ever wanted. At this moment, Eldon appears in the kitchen door.
Eldon.
Quietly. She said she could have a wonderful career, the perfect marriage, a house full of children. But who's going to be their mother when I'm at the office until 9 every night? And how is she going to be there for Will every time he needs her to tell him he's a brilliant writer? And she does this beautiful sigh and just sits and then says, I think my mother was wrong. Can't have it all. And then she turns to Murphy and says, but you figured this out already, didn't you? It breaks my heart. You are watching this girl's dreams die in her eyes.
Yeah.
And at that moment, Eldon drops his paintbrush. And I love this moment because she goes, Eldon. And she's not mad. She just says Eldon. And he goes, oh, look, it's me.
Also, he dropped it on purpose, right?
That's a good question. I could see it go either way.
Yeah.
I could really see it go either way. Because this is one of those great moments where Eldon is sincerely invested in listening. I could absolutely see Eldon have just dropped it from listening.
Yeah. No, I did.
And his oh look is me is so awkward that I'm like, I'm not sure you plan to speak right now. He says, probably looks like I was eavesdropping, but that's not it at all. Pause. So you're having marital problems, are you? And Murphy tries to usher Eldon out with a fake sale. It's midnight madness at Ed's Paint. You get a free painter's cap with every purchase, so bye. And he says, no. He must speak his mind on this or he'll regret it until the day he dies. And all of us think Eldon is about to angle for Corky. Like we assume this is going to be, he's thrown his hat in the ring. He's going to get all lecherous and it's going to be one of those moments that we always see with him and Corky. And Corky says, it's okay, Murphy. She wants to hear this. And he says a line that I forgot he says that really made me go, huh? He says, forgive me for saying this, but I don't think you're considering the guy's point of view here. And Murphy says, oh, great, here we go. Yeah. Which, honestly, I do too.
And knowing Eldon, also, oh, great, here we go. Yeah.
And he actually says something that I think is very important. And this is to the point that I made earlier, which is that the patriarchy hurts everyone. Mm-hmm. And he says, okay, first of all, we come into this world where everyone says, it's a boy. Now let's start teaching him about women, money, power, and make sure he learns to laugh like this. And he does a big, masculine, hearty guffaw. He says, so you give it a shot. But you find that it's not working for you because you realize that deep down that you're an artist. And all you really want to do is paint or write. And you don't have the courage to take the leap until you meet her. And she gives you that courage. And you love her for it. And you want to give her the world, but you can't even afford a simple greeting card because you're an artist. Oh, this gets me so much. And she's this big, successful career woman. And what does she need you for? Well, maybe she doesn't. And that is your worst fear. Because all you really want is for her to think you're great. That's all he has to say. And he gets up.
So question for you. Because I can see it either way. Is Eldon talking about his relationship with Corky, or is he talking from experience from a woman from his past?
I think it's both.
I think you're right.
I think it's both. I think there's also weirdly something in there about his absolutely platonic relationship with Murphy. Like, I think for him, in some ways, it's bigger than romance as well. And I think it's a huge part of that I feel so deeply as an artist.
Yeah.
You know, about this, like, you want to be able to do this thing. Oh, but you're an artist, so you can't. But you also, like, it's just such a beautiful speech. And I think it's so unexpected, especially for 1990. Yeah. To be talking about masculinity and the way that patriarchal gender norms also hurt men by telling them that they have to be a certain way. And so this emasculation that Will is feeling for trying to break the rules by trying to do something else, but then also being expected to quote unquote be the man is so painful. And it just hurts people. It just hurts. It hurts the cis man in the relationship. It hurts the cis woman in the relationship. Like, it hurts everyone. And the fact that he says it in such a beautiful way that is also, as we know, self-sacrificial for himself, because he's pushing her back toward the quote-unquote man who stole her from him. Not really, because she wasn't going to be with
Which
Eldon.
she eventually says, right? Like, she's better off with him. Like, that's...
Yeah. And what I love is Corky says, Will's never said that to her before. And Eldon's like, well, people don't talk anymore. You have to talk. I do believe that Eldon has incredible communication in his relationships.
Oh, my God. incredible communication.
Mainly because he can't not say what he thinks and feels.
He also
But that's
teaches that
great.
to Murphy when he,
Yeah.
when he's always honest about what is happening in their
Yeah.
relationship.
And I love this because Corky, I also feel this moment with Corky where she's like, when? When is she supposed to be able to talk? And she says she has to fly to Tokyo tomorrow, and then she's there for 2 weeks. Like that idea of like, yeah, it's so simple. Just talk to each other. It's like, when you have no time, when you're just trying to, sometimes, especially as artists, like we're working 2 to 3 jobs at any given time, just trying to make your ends meet. Like, when are you supposed to be able to stop and talk about your feelings? Because you're also in survival mode, and she's the breadwinner. So she's just trying to do the thing that allows him to do this. And this way that it can fester resentment between each other, when actually all of your secondary emotions are coming from the fact that you're afraid you're going to lose them. You're afraid that they don't want you anymore. You're afraid that you're not doing enough. Like, it's all coming from these places of fear, but it comes out in frustration and resentment and anger. And I feel that so deep when she's like, great, I'd love to talk. When am I supposed to talk to him? We never see each other. Or when we do, it's just the frustrations. Like, it's so real. It's so beautifully written. And I feel it so deeply, not only as an artist, but as a person in a marriage, like as a person in relationship with anyone, like with your family. You're like, when are you supposed to talk about things? You never see each other enough. Like, it sounds so simple, but communication is one of the hardest things to cement, especially if you already have a relationship. To introduce communication when you're already in relationship is so difficult.
And you need to have compromise, right? Like, you can't, if you want to come together on this goal, you're both going to have to sacrifice something.
Yep.
And a lot of people come into relationships, whether it is romantic or not, or even with family, with, well, I got my own stuff going on. I have to think of myself. Yes, but if you want this thing, then maybe you have to sacrifice something in your own life to get it, because it's not only about you.
Yep. And that's the thing about, like, if you want to be in communication, you both have to be in communication. One person cannot create communication for a couple.
I feel like for this episode now, talking with you, that we should have had a therapist as a third chair.
I know. I said to you before we started recording, this episode really hit me, and it made me very sad, but I also, in a very beautiful way. It's just, I worked through a lot on this episode.
So something that also I think really took my attention that I hadn't noticed before, and this is also in retrospect because we have a revival now where we know that Corky didn't have children.
Yeah.
That I think something particularly back then for sure was never talked about. This idea that Corky says, maybe it's not good for my future children if I'm working all the time to have them, which then implies, so maybe if I make the choice to choose me, I shouldn't have children because it's better off for them.
This is something that, without getting too deep into my personal life, my spouse and I talk about a lot, because for us, the decision whether or not we will have children, or a child at this point, a lot of it is based around what is responsible. If we want to have a child, do we have the life that we can support them and give them the life we would want to, or do we have to change that to accommodate? And it's like, whether or not you want them is one thing. Whether or not you can responsibly give them the life you want to give them is another.
Yeah.
And I love that that is dropped in there. It's like, well, who's going to be their mother if I can't come home, if I don't get out of work till 9? Now, granted, there's also the conversation of like, well, you can still be their mother. They can see their mother has a job, and that's fine. But for her idea of how you raise children, the idea of having a nanny, the idea of not having a mother at home throughout their younger years, like, those might be things that she's not okay with. Those might be things that she can't reconcile with. For her, being a mother means a form of presence in their day-to-day lives that is not available with her career. And I love that they dropped that nugget, because that's a huge conversation that happened in the 80s and 90s about like, what does parenting look like? Does it have to look like this? Does the mother have to be like this? If you're a career woman, do you have to take a break to have your kids? Or can, like this, I felt very represented by Corky in this episode.
Well, it was interesting because, recently fashion icon Iris Apfel passed away at 102. Yeah. For those who aren't familiar with her, you might know her as this amazing older woman with lots of chunky jewelry and fabulous outfits. And she
big glasses.
Oh, big glasses. Yes, very big point.
She's a maximalist icon.
Very much so. But what I think I didn't realize was how many different lives she had had.
Yeah.
She worked in textiles. She worked as interior designer. she had, let's just say, lots of different lives and was married to a man who also made a lot of money as much as she did. And they traveled a lot. And in her obituary, she talked about that they didn't have children because she personally didn't think that it was conducive to the kinds of travel that they were doing. And she didn't want her children to be raised by nannies. And they were married for
choice.
She was married to her husband for 67 years and looks like they had an amazing life. And she had many different facets of her life where she did many different things. And it's an amazing life to admire and look at. And and to see someone of that age also say that's a choice that I made. Even George Burns, I mean, this is a man's point of view, but he and Gracie Allen, when they decided to have children in the 30s, they stopped touring because they didn't want children to be brought up in a trunk, right? So like there are choices that you do make because of that. It's the same choice that Corky may or may not have made. We don't know why she made that choice, right? Because it wasn't good for the children that she would have, and she chose herself.
Or she didn't get to make the choice.
Yes, that's why I don't want to, I'm trying to be delicate about that. She may not have had the choice, but it was nice to see this brought up in 1990.
But I do, want to be delicate about this subject as somebody who, is personally in like fertility and family planning conversations, but also everyone has their own experience. But I do also want to say like that idea of like, I think it's important to say she might not have been able to make that choice, because I think something that I grew up around in this time period was the implication that if you chose your career, you were choosing not to have kids. That they would say like, well, she could have had kids if she had chosen to have kids.
Yeah,
it's
I don't want to be saying that
it's
either.
not, no, I'm not saying you are. What I'm saying is I think it's important to say she might not have had the choice because her life went in a direction where her body was not able to, and that's not her fault or her career's fault. And I think I grew up with the messaging in the area where I grew up that you couldn't say that you didn't have the choice, that it was, well, you chose the career. It was a one or the other thing. It was like, well, she was selfish, and so she had a career and she chose not to have kids. And it's like, well, no, she could have had a career and had kids, but relationship worked out in such a way, finances worked out in such a way. There were other factors. But I grew up around such a black and white, you choose or you don't. And I think it's really important to say that she could have wanted kids, and her life unfolded in such a way that she didn't get to make that active choice before it was made for her. And her having a career was not a nail in the coffin to having kids.
Yes. And I would say that that is a bit of my experience, because I am someone who, I went to grad school. I didn't start my career until my late 20s because of grad school. And then by my 30s, I was on medication for my autoimmune disease, which means that I most likely cannot have a healthy pregnancy because I have a suppressed immune system.
Yeah.
Which will then take me, I will be on this medication most likely through menopause. I may not, but that's what's going to happen. Doesn't mean that when I'm older that I can't adopt, that I can't be a foster parent, but it does feel like that choice was taken away from me because I'm not in a financial situation, because I've been sick for 10 years and I'm starting my career over again. Those are things that feel that the choice is put on you. So I completely understand that feeling, if that's what happened to Corky, that the choice was taken away.
Yeah. And I think it's also just as empowering to say that maybe she hit a point in her life where she was like, you know what? This is actually, my life is just as full.
Yeah.
Just like Iris. My life is just as full without that thing that I was told I was supposed to have. This is a phrase we've talked about, but the idea of can have it all. Having it all doesn't necessarily mean children.
Yeah.
Like the idea that Corky could have said, oh, I can have it all, without that one element that I thought had to be part of it, that I'm not having it all if I don't have that. That Corky has a life that is her version of having it all, and she's not without. So all that to say, this is obviously a sensitive topic, but we are people with uteruses who have opinions about this and have life experience around this,
I'm going to focus for a moment on the phrase having it all, which I think today feels like a cliche. It feels like a tired statement, but it's a statement that didn't come out of thin air.
Nope.
Now, in 1990, the so-called Cosmo girl from Cosmopolitan magazine turned 25, and there was a lot of coverage of it. The reason being that enough time had sort of passed since this had happened, and also there was a debate around it. Now, I just want to read to you the opening of this article because I think it'll give people a sense to drop in to what I'm talking about. For 25 years, she was celebrated for her sensuality, fretted about work, and talked about exercise. Office romances, she had those. Professional successes, she'd have that too. Her favorite magazine tells her about all those things. Guess you could say she was that cosmopolitan girl. A quarter century ago, when that girl was born, feminism was a nascent intellectual vision and sex a subject that nice girls avoided. American women have changed, and there every step of the way has been Cosmopolitan magazine, which celebrates its 25 years under the stewardship of Helen Gurley Brown next month. So Helen Gurley Brown, who at the time in 1990, for that long had been the editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine, wrote a book in 1962 called Sex and the Single Girl, which many on Murphy Brown may know because it's a pun in the name of an episode of Murphy Brown later on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important because this was a revolution at the time that women could possibly enjoy sex and be single, right? Like, we don't think of that right now.
Yeah.
By 1965, she became the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine, which had been formerly a literary magazine like Somerset Maugham, and had been taken over as a career woman magazine for particularly single women. Now, I think, Jesse, you and I probably know Cosmo for the so-called Cosmo quiz, right? That was a lot in pop culture growing up, which was this idea that, like, oh, you would take this quiz to see if you're compatible with your partner, to see how to get a better orgasm. And so I think it's interesting because looking back, right, a lot of that feels not feminism, perhaps. But at the time, it was because these were things that women were not allowed to talk about or discuss or supposedly do. Also understand that the pill was invented in 1960, but it was only for married women and still not for all married women till 1965. So your doctor, even if you were married, could say, I don't think you should have the pill. And here's what gets me, because I didn't realize this when doing research for this. It wasn't until 1972 that unmarried women could get the pill legally. And many women would share a wedding ring to put on to go to their doctor just to get a diaphragm.
Yep.
So in 1982, Helen Gurley Brown writes a book called Having It All, Love, Success, Sex, and Money, Even If You Started With Nothing. AKA, you can have family, career, and good sex. I think those of us who are big musical theater fans know the musical Baby from 1983 by David Sher and Richard Maltby Jr., where there is a literal I want song, which in musical theater is a term. I want song, I want it all, in which they talk about how...
Oh, no, I literally sang 3 different songs from that musical.
Do you? Okay, it's a great musical.
Yeah.
This song is how I was introduced to it, with the idea that there are 3 women in this musical trying to have a baby. So they're going to have everything. And anyway, many people believe that Helen Gurley Brown helped to, in many ways, foster in the second wave feminism of Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan. But Betty Friedan, the author of The Feminine Mystique, calls her anti-feminist and an immature teenage level sexual fantasy. What I think is really interesting looking back at now is Dr. Caitlin Mendes, professor of gender and media sociology at the University of Leicester, says rather than being bound to the home, having it all represented ambition beyond what was expected of women at the time. And I think that's how we have to look at this phrase. Whether people or even in the show or Murphy think of it as attached to Helen Gurley Brown, this is where it came from. Now, today, Cosmo itself said, looking back at that phrase in 2022, that it left little nuance for race, sexuality, and gender identity.
Intersectionality is what we call that.
Exactly. Now, what's also interesting, if you look back at 1990 and the debate that was happening over this idea of having it all, a woman is quoted in this New York Times article who is a magazine editor as saying that it was a liberated ideal, whereas advertisers called it an aspirational focus that helps marketers sell products to women who think of themselves as active and self-reliant. But a professor at the time called the Cosmo Girl an assemblage of visual cliches. that identifies women merely as sedentary objects.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think is interesting is that the debate that we're having now was kind of happening then, but also they interviewed a woman who was Murphy's age, who was the editor of Family Circle. And she said, however frivolous, Helen Gurley Brown was supportive of the whole idea of sexual freedom, and you can't discount that. Now, by 1997, Helen Gurley Brown was out at Cosmo. And for example, in 95, the National Center for Education Statistics said the gap between men and women in education has essentially disappeared for the younger generation.
That's some BS.
Absolutely. And so now bringing into the context of how we grew up in the 90s to today, and eventually, obviously, in season 4, we're going to talk about the Year of the Woman, 1992, right? But you also get younger women coming in with the girl power movement, the riot girl movement, and what Alison Yarrow, who is the writer of 90s Bitch, Media Culture and the Failed Promise of Gender Equality, calls sort of that 90s, early 2000s where women were commercialized for their sexuality and their insecurity. So that we were promised all of this equality and we're all on the same page and look at all the women in all of these amazing, prominent jobs and situations. But if you look at it, they were really just sort of put into these sort of boxes and ridiculed. She says, I call what was done to women in the 90s bitchification, and it coincided with a radical new media landscape, the emerging of the 24-hour news cycle, providing real-time, real-emitting coverage of live and current events, swiftly infiltrated households and shaped the American consciousness during and after the Persian Gulf War. So pretty much going back to the 60s, what Murphy and Corky are looking at is they were brought up with this idea that they could be homemakers and mothers, and there was women's work and there was men's work, and there was no sort of mingling of them, right? And so today Cosmo says that the barriers are different, right? We don't have that anymore, but we still have issues of social mobility, racial inequality, and prohibitive childcare costs. Not to mention, I would say, the higher cost of living. And then Cosmo interviews all of these women, particularly writers, who all have side hustles because their main job, they can't afford to pay for their life.
Yep.
So I think this is interesting just to conclude that even though it was up to debate as being a cliche in the 90s, you know, you think that maybe it wasn't if you look at it through now. It had a larger impact on the very different conditions than today, where I think many women today will look at this phrase as forced onto women with the idea that they had to be more than one thing, like Corky says, right? She doesn't know how to be there for her husband to tell him he's smart and talented and also do her job. That women were being forced to be too many things to too many people. Because I think the sentiment is that we deserve to go out and get a piece of the pie, that there is no success and fail. It's just trying.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really, simply said that we don't have debates over whether men can.
Yep.
There is no debate over whether a man can go after everything he wants and have a family, because it's the assumption that somebody else will take care of the things get dropped in the process. It's just, it's hypocritical. And it's also the idea that you're allowed to define what success looks like.
Yeah, because a lot of having it all comes down to you have to do it all and be everything for everybody, whereas men are not expected to also be part of the childcare rearing. Like there's an extra thing that women have to do on top of everything else that they're already doing that is not expected of men.
Yeah. I mean, it's the idea that, Corky says it's about like, who will mother them? Well, who will father them?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's frustrating and it's never ending. And also pay disparity is still a real thing.
Yes, it is.
So Murphy, in response to Corky's frustration about when is she supposed to figure out how to talk, it definitely has an air of like, there's no point. It's hopeless. She says, Corky, on behalf of all of those who long ago gave up trying to have it all, years ago, do her a favor. Don't give up trying to have it all. Maybe one of us can buck the system. Which I think, as we discussed, many people have. And the system has altered.
Yes.
So Corky considers that, and she asks Murphy if she thinks Miles will be very upset if she doesn't go to Tokyo tomorrow. Murphy says, leave Miles to her. That seems to be the one relationship with a man she can handle. Which honestly, I was waiting for Eldon to say something, be like, hey. But it's fine. Corky says it's so hard and she doesn't know what's going to happen. She starts to leave the townhouse, and then she turns back and says, I liked your story, Eldon. Eldon and Murphy watch her leave, And Murphy looks at Eldon and says, that was a really beautiful thing you did.
It was.
Eldon just goes, yeah, I'm a beautiful guy. I love Robert Pastorelli so much. And then he just says, she belongs with him. Look at those skinny little arms. I mean, you just know she can't bowl. It's so good. And Murphy, chuckles at this and says, it's been a few years, but if he wants to knock down a few pins, she'll be willing. And he says, okay, but he'll keep score because he's a man and that's what men do. She says, he'll keep score in bowling. She'll keep score in life because that's what women do.
And we have a very Fonz moment where the audience goes crazy at these lines.
It's so funny because they are on their way out at the end of this episode. They're just throwing one-liners back and forth with each other. He says he'll tell her what women do. They buy shelf paper and then they put it all over everything. Why do they do that? And she says in her final moments in the doorway, says, well, a man can read an entire newspaper in the bathroom and sort through a week's mail. He can have a pizza delivered in there and never leave. And then they walk out of the door and we end on the credits, which are over the image of the fully sparking meat carver. And I kept looking on all the faces in the still to see if someone was just losing it. But they actually are all in character in that moment. I love them together. I love their relationship.
They're the best.
Thank you for listening, friends.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, please show us your support by
liking,
subscribing,
and interacting with us on social media.
Our handle everywhere is
@MurphyBrownPod.
You can also email us at
murphybrownpod@gmail.com
or visit our website at
murphybrownpod.com.
Share us with your friends.
Give us a 5-star rating
wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can also support the podcast by checking out our Patreon.
You can donate once
or be a recurring subscriber
and access exclusive deep dives on Murphy Brown and other related topics,
as well as bonus content we had to cut for time.
100% of what you donate goes toward creating this podcast.
So any way you are able to support, we deeply appreciate.
And we'll see you next time
for another edition of FYI,
the Murphy Brown Podcast. Did you know that Tokyo Disney is not technically owned by Disney? It's the only park that is licensed through intellectual property?
Yeah.
I was shocked.
Fascinating.
The things you learn on the Murphy Brown Podcast, guys.